The first thing that's very glaring about the club after midnight isn't the sound, but the silence underneath it. The thrum of the bass is a physical presence, a vibration that travels through the soles of your shoes, but the real power lies in the spaces between the notes. It is a watchful, calculating quiet, the silence of money, of influence, and of secrets traded in the dark. I move through this world like a ghost in a uniform, my stiff white shirt and black vest serving as my shroud, though the bow tie feels more like a noose after an 8-hour shift. For 3 years, this velvet-draped cage has been my sanctuary and my prison. I have learned the art of pouring 12-year-old scotch for men whose polite titles mask eyes promising violence, and serving champagne to women whose smiles are as sharp and cold as the diamonds at their throats. My father taught me the most important lesson for a girl like me. Be invisible. Don't look up, don't attract attention, and never, ever get involved. Invisibility is the only thing that keeps you safe in a room full of predators. But tonight, the air feels heavier, charged with a static I can't ignore. The silence has shifted from a hum to a roar, and the shadows in the corner of the room seem to have lengthened. I focus on the routine, my hands moving with practiced robotic precision as I polish a glass that is already spotless. My father's voice is a desperate echo in the back of my mind, reminding me that looking the other way is the only way to survive. Yet, as I scan the room, I realize that the cage is tightening. The ghost I've spent years perfecting is beginning to flicker, and the silence I relied on for protection is about to become my greatest threat. I am ground zero for a storm I can already feel vibrating straight into my bones. The moment he walked in, the heavy velvet of the club seemed to exhale, a human sea yielding to a shark. They didn't have to clear a path. The crowd simply parted, a silent acknowledgement of the long, dark shadow his reputation cast over the city. This was Ro Jae-min. He was taller than I expected, built with the solid, immovable grace of a cliff face, his dark hair silvered at the temples in a way that spoke of wisdom bought with blood. His suit, tailored to perfection, likely cost more than the education I was working toward, but it was his eyes that arrested me. They were a chilling, pale gray, like a winter sky moments before a storm. As he scanned the room, it wasn't with interest or curiosity, but with a cold, absolute sense of ownership. For a terrifying second, those Arctic eyes landed on me. I felt the temperature at the bar drop, a physical chill that settled into my marrow. I immediately dropped my gaze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird as I focused on polishing an already spotless glass. The routine motion was my only anchor in the sudden surge of adrenaline. Don't look up. Don't attract attention. Be the ghost. He didn't join the entourage that settled into the reserved booth, a nest of black suits and watchful eyes. Instead, he detached himself from the group and walked toward the bar. My bar. Each footstep on the polished marble floor felt like a nail in my coffin, a rhythmic countdown to an encounter I wasn't prepared for. The space around me emptied as other patrons subtly found reasons to be elsewhere, leaving me standing at ground zero. Vodka, he said. His voice was a low rumble that bypassed my ears and vibrated straight into my bones, accentless and utterly devoid of warmth. Crystal Head, if you have it. I nodded, my throat too tight for words, and turned to reach for the iconic skull-shaped bottle. My hands, usually so steady they could pour to the microliter, trembled. I could feel his gaze on my back, a physical weight that made the air feel thin, as if he were consuming all the oxygen in the room. The winter sky had arrived at my station, and I was the only thing standing in its path. I reached for the heavy skull-shaped bottle of Crystal Head, the glass cold and unforgiving against my palm. My movements were clumsy, a direct betrayal of the years I had spent perfecting the fluid, invisible grace of a career bartender. As I poured the crystalline liquid into a heavy crystal tumbler, the sound of the pour seemed unnaturally loud in the pressurized silence that followed Ro Jae-min. I could feel his gaze on the back of my neck, a physical weight, cold and steady, that made my breath catch in my chest. I was about to set the glass before him when a man slid onto the stool next to Jae-min. It was Marco, a junior manager with a slick, nervous energy that always made my skin crawl. He was the kind of man who smiled too wide and laughed too loud, his eyes always darting around the room to see who was watching. I had never liked him. He lacked the quiet dignity of the true power players. Jae-min, a pleasure as always, Marco said, his voice a fraction too boisterous for the room's delicate equilibrium. He didn't wait for a response. Before the tumbler could even touch the marble, Marco's hand shot out, intercepting the drink and sliding it back toward himself. Let me get that for you. A man of your stature deserves something elevated. With a flourish that made my blood run cold, Marco produced a small, unlabeled glass bottle from the silk lining of his jacket. It was no larger than a vial of expensive perfume, yet it held the gravity of a loaded gun. A gift, Marco whispered, leaning in with a conspiratorial air that I was clearly meant to overhear. From the new shipment. The purest you'll ever taste. A special blend, reserved just for the top of the chain. He unscrewed the cap with a practiced twist and tipped a single clear drop into the vodka. It hit the surface and vanished instantly, leaving no oily residue, no cloudiness, just the same deceptive, sparkling clarity. My breath hitched. Every instinct I possessed, every lesson learned from a childhood I'd spent a decade running from, screamed in unison. Marco's posture was too eager, his eyes too bright with a strange, feverish anticipation. This wasn't a gesture of respect, it was a script from a nightmare I knew all too well. Jae-min stared at the glass, his expression a mask of chilling indifference, and as his hand reached out to claim the poisoned offering, the world around me began to shatter. Time didn't slow down, it shattered. As Jae-min's fingers closed around the stem of the heavy glass, the world narrowed to that single, sparkling pool of liquid. My father's face flashed in my mind, a jagged memory of a man who had seen too much and paid for it with his life. His voice, once a comforting rumble, now felt like a desperate, frantic echo from the past, clawing at my conscience. Don't ever get involved, Yara. You see something, you look the other way. You survive. But looking the other way was exactly how we had ended up at his funeral, standing under a grey sky while men in suits watched us from the distance. I looked at Marco. His posture was too eager, a predator disguised as a sycophant. The way his eyes darted toward the drink, gleaming with a strange, feverish anticipation, confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't a toast, it was an execution. It was the same script I had witnessed in the shadows of my childhood, a nightmare I had spent a decade running from, only to find it waiting for me at the end of a polished marble bar. The special blend wasn't a gift. It was a hit. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, a frantic rhythmic pulse that threatened to drown out the club's bass. My father's warning was a heavy weight, a chain of self-preservation that begged me to stay a ghost. If I spoke, if I interfered, I would be stepping out of the shadows and into the direct line of fire. I would be breaking the one rule that had kept me alive in this velvet-draped cage. But as Jae-min lifted the glass, the winter sky of his eyes focused on the liquid, I realized that the silence I had cultivated was becoming a noose. I couldn't be the one who stood by while the shark was gutted in front of me. The trauma of the past surged up, not to paralyze me this time, but to propel me. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was the only witness to a murder in motion. The routine of the ghost was failing, and the moral center of my discomfort was screaming for a choice. I could watch a man die and stay safe, or I could speak and invite the storm. The pen in my pocket suddenly felt as heavy and as lethal as the skull-shaped bottle I had just held. The pen felt like a weapon, its weight disproportionate to its size as I gripped it beneath the shelter of the bar's mahogany ledge. My hands were moving before my mind could fully process the gravity of the betrayal I was committing against my own survival. I reached for a pristine white cocktail napkin, the fabric-like paper mocking my agitation with its crisp, clean surface. Each letter I scrawled was a jagged testament to the fear coursing through me, the ink bleeding slightly into the fibers as I wrote 5 words that would either save a life or end my own. Don't drink it. Leave immediately. I didn't look at Marco, whose feverish anticipation was almost palpable, nor did I look at Jae-min, whose hand was centimeters away from the crystalline trap. Every second felt like a slow-motion fracture in time. The bass of the club thrummed in the floorboards, but in my world, there was only the sound of my own breath, shallow and sharp. My father's ghost screamed at me to stop, to crumple the paper and retreat into the shadows, but the memory of his silence was what finally pushed my hand forward. I moved with a deceptive, practiced fluidity, pretending to wipe down a spill that didn't exist. With a flick of my wrist, I slid the napkin across the polished marble. It came to a silent stop right beside the untouched tumbler of vodka. The white of the paper glared against the dark stone, a beacon of treason in the middle of a crowded room. I didn't linger to watch him see it. I turned immediately, busying myself with the sink, my back to the bar as I braced for the world to explode. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. The silence behind me stretched, taut and deadly, humming with a frequency that made my teeth ache. Had he read it? Would he listen, or would he see my interference as a different kind of threat? I focused on the rhythmic scrubbing of a glass, my entire body a coiled spring. The ghost was gone. I was exposed, standing at the center of a target I had drawn myself. I waited for the sound of the glass hitting the floor or the cold command of a man who didn't like being told what to do, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the cage of my ribs. The silence behind me didn't break. It solidified. It was a dense, suffocating vacuum that seemed to swallow the club's music and the low chatter of the elite. I kept my back turned, my hands still submerged in the lukewarm sink water, scrubbing a glass that had no dirt left on it. I was waiting for him to stand up and walk away, to heed the warning and vanish back into the night. Instead, I heard the soft, distinct rustle of the cocktail napkin being picked up. A second passed. Then 3. The air grew thin, charged with the static of a predator who had just realized he was being hunted. Suddenly, a hand shot out. It wasn't a reach for the glass or a move to settle the bill. Fingers, cold and strong as iron bands, wrapped around my right wrist. The strike was so fast it was almost invisible, a blur of movement that pinned my arm against the polished marble bar. I gasped, the sound caught in my throat as my head snapped up, my ghost mask shattering instantly. I met those winter-gray eyes. Ro Jae-min wasn't looking at the napkin anymore. He was looking through me. His expression was a terrifying void of emotion, a mask of calculated suspicion that made my heart hammer against my ribs like a dying bird. He didn't pull me toward him, nor did he push me away. He simply held me there, a physical anchor that broadcast his dominance to everyone watching. From the corner of my eye, I saw his entourage, the nest of black suits, begin to stir. They didn't reach for weapons, not yet, but their postures shifted. Shoulders squared, chins lifted, and a dozen pairs of eyes fixed on us with razor-sharp intensity. They were reading the air, sensing the sudden violent change in the bar's equilibrium. Marco, still perched on his stool, froze. His slick, nervous energy curdled into something sharper, his gaze darting between Jaemin's gripped hand and the untouched, skull-shaped glass. Jaemin's grip wasn't brutal, but it was absolute. It was the grip of a man who owned everything he touched. And in that moment, he owned my life. The velvet-draped cage had finally closed its bars. My breath hitched in my chest, a jagged, shallow rhythm. I was no longer the invisible observer. By trying to save the shark, I had invited him to bite, and as the silence stretched taut enough to snap, I realized that the only thing more dangerous than being ignored by Ro Jae-min was being noticed by him. The pressure of his thumb against my pulse point was a warning, a silent command for stillness that I obeyed with every fiber of my being. Around us, the club continued its oblivious dance, but at the bar, the air had turned into a pressurized tomb. Marco's eyes were darting between us, his slick forehead beginning to bead with a sudden, greasy sweat. He expected a scene, an outburst of mafia violence or a cold dismissal. He didn't expect the intimacy of the iron grip that held me captive. Jae-min leaned forward, his movement slow and predatory. To the watchers in the back booths, it looked like a man of power intimidating a lowly servant, a common enough sight in a place where money bought silence. But as his face came inches from mine, I smelled the scent of expensive sandalwood and the sharp, metallic tang of the winter air that seemed to follow him. He didn't look at the poisoned glass. He didn't look at Marco. His winter-gray eyes searched mine, peeling back the layers of my ghost persona until he found the raw, trembling girl underneath. You have a steady hand for someone so terrified, he whispered. His voice was a low vibration, barely a breath against my ear, hidden by the thrum of the bass. Why break your father's rule for a man like me? I couldn't find my voice. It was buried under the weight of his stare. He didn't wait for an answer. He saw the truth in the way I didn't flinch away from him, the way my eyes flickered with a desperate honesty he clearly hadn't seen in years. In that moment, a cold recognition passed between us. He realized that in a room full of his own hand-picked men, the only person not trying to kill him was the girl with the shaking hands and the white cocktail napkin. Listen carefully, he murmured, his grip tightening just enough to ensure my absolute focus. When I let go, you will not scream. You will not run. You will smile, as your note suggested, and you will bring me a bottle of water, unopened. Then, you will tell me exactly which door leads to the service alley without passing the cameras. He was testing me, turning my act of rebellion into an act of alliance. His gaze shifted briefly to Marco, a flash of lethal intent crossing his features before returning to the mask of indifference. He wasn't just surviving, he was hunting. Don't look at the traitor, he cautioned, his voice dropping to a ghost of a sound. Be the ghost one last time, Yara. Led me out, and I might let you live to see the morning. He released my wrist. The sudden absence of his touch felt like a physical blow. I stood there, the ghost of his fingers still burning against my skin, as he leaned back and offered a thin, terrifyingly pleasant smile to the room. The game had changed. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was the wolf's only exit. The transition was seamless, a masterclass in lethal theater. As Jamin stood, his hand didn't fully relinquish me. Instead, he stepped around the corner of the bar, his fingers shifting to grip my upper arm with a possessive firmness that forced me to walk in lockstep with him. To the room, it looked like a powerful man claiming a prize. To me, it felt like being tethered to a detonator. We stopped directly in front of Marco. The junior manager's nervous energy had peaked into a visible tremor. He stared at the crystal tumbler that Jamin now held in his free hand, the skull-shaped glass swirling with the clear, poisoned vodka. Marco, Jamin said, his voice terrifyingly conversational. You spoke of gifts. Of special blends. It would be a tragedy to let such a rare vintage go to waste. Marco's face drained of color, turning a sickly, translucent gray. Lorenzo. I mean, sir. It was for you. A tribute. I couldn't possibly. I insist. Jamin stepped closer, crowding Marco's personal space. He leaned in, pulling me with him so that the three of us formed a tight, suffocating circle. The wolf tilted the glass, the liquid dancing dangerously near the rim. In my world, a gift not shared is an insult. And I am feeling particularly insulted tonight. The light from the back bar caught the crystalline liquid, making it sparkle with a deceptive, diamond-like brilliance. I could feel the heat radiating from Jamin's body, a stark contrast to the icy composure of his gaze. Marco backed away, but his stool hit the edge of the reserved booths table. He was trapped between the wolf and the very men he had hoped to impress with this assassination. Drink, Jamin commanded. The word wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. He held the glass out, moving it toward Marco's trembling lips. The silence around us was no longer calculating. It was predatory. The entourage had gone still, their eyes fixed on the glass, realizing that the wind had changed direction. Marco looked at the vodka, then at Jamin's arctic eyes, and finally at me. He saw the ghost who had betrayed him, his expression twisting into a mask of pure, frantic terror. I can't, Marco whispered, his voice breaking. Then you admit it, Jamin murmured, his grip on my arm tightening just enough to remind me that I was his only shield. It isn't a gift. It's a signature. With a flick of his wrist, Jamin didn't force the drink down Marco's throat. Instead, he poured the liquid slowly onto the floor at Marco's feet, the vodka splashing against his expensive Italian shoes like acid. The message was clear. The hit had failed, and the hunt had begun. Jamin turned his back on the trembling man, pulling me toward the darkness of the service corridor before the first shout of alarm could break the silence. The crash of the crystal tumbler hitting the floor was the only signal the club's shadow dwellers needed. Behind us, the nest of black suits erupted, chairs scraping against marble like gunfire. Marco was screaming, a high, panicked sound that was quickly swallowed by the sudden, heavy pulse of the club's security alarm. The amber glow of the vignetto shifted to a violent, rhythmic red. "Movement," Jamin hissed, his grip on my arm never wavering. He didn't look at the chaos. He looked at me, his winter-grey eyes demanding the exit I had promised. I didn't think. I let the ghost take over, but this time, the ghost was leading the hunt. I pulled him toward the heavy oak paneling behind the bar, a section of the wall that looked like part of the decor but housed the service lift for high-value liquor. I hit the hidden latch, and the wood groaned open. "In here," I whispered. The air in the service corridor was a sharp contrast to the club, smelling of damp concrete, stale mop water, and industrial cleaner. This was my world, the veins of the building that the predators never saw. We moved through the narrow fluorescent-lit passage, our shadows stretching long and distorted against the peeling paint. I knew every loose floorboard, every blind spot in the camera sweep. Behind us, the heavy thud of footsteps echoed. Marco's men, or perhaps the traitors within Jamin's own circle, were flooding the service area. Jamin reached into his jacket, and the metallic clack of a slide racking into place sent a jolt of ice through my veins. He didn't aim at me. He aimed at the door we had just exited, his eyes never leaving the darkness. "Left," I commanded, my voice steadier than I ever thought possible. "The trash compactor room has a chute that leads to the sub-basement. They'll expect us to head for the roof." We wove through a labyrinth of stainless steel kitchens and storage crates. I saw the club's invisible staff, dishwashers and prep cooks, huddled in the corners, their eyes wide with the same terror I had felt for years. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I was no longer just a waitress. I was the navigator for a dying empire. We reached the heavy steel door of the loading dock. I could hear the muffled roar of the city outside, the sirens of police cars converging on the front entrance. I pressed my palm against the cold metal, feeling the vibration of the street. "The alley opens behind a laundromat," I said, looking up at him. "The cameras there have been broken for months. If we go now, we're ghosts." Jamin looked at me, his arctic gaze softening just a fraction, a moment of recognition that I was the only thing standing between him and the winter sky. "Lead the way, Yara," he murmured. "Lead the way." The cool night air hit us like a physical blow, smelling of rain and asphalt, a stark contrast to the suffocating luxury of the club. We emerged from the shadows of the laundromat, standing in an alleyway where the streetlights flickered with a dying buzz. Jamin finally let go of my arm, but the heat of his grip remained, a phantom brand on my skin. He leaned back against the brick wall, the adrenaline of the escape settling into a terrifying, statuesque calm. He looked at me, and for the first time, he wasn't looking through me to the next threat. He was seeing the girl who had shattered her own life to save his. "The ghost has a name," he said, his voice a low vibration in the quiet alley. "Yara." I nodded, my chest heaving, the stiff white shirt of my uniform now stained with the grime of the service tunnels. The silence between us wasn't the calculating quiet of the club. It was the heavy, expectant stillness of a crossroads. My father's voice had finally gone silent, replaced by the thrumming reality of my own heartbeat. I had broken the rule. I had looked. I had acted. And in doing so, I had burned the only home I knew. "You can go back," Jamin murmured, his ice-grey eyes searching mine. "I can ensure that tonight is erased for you. You can find another bar, another uniform, and disappear back into the shadows. You can be the ghost again, invisible and safe." He stepped closer, his presence a dark shadow against the brick. "Or you can realize that the cage door is already open. A girl who can navigate a shark through a storm is wasted behind a marble bar." The choice hung in the air, a jagged blade. Behind me lay the life of a ghost, quiet, fearful, and lonely. Before me stood the wolf, offering a world where silence was a weapon, not a shield. It was the very violence I had spent a decade running from, yet standing next to him, I felt a strange, intoxicating surge of agency. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't invisible. I was essential. Invisibility didn't save my father, I said, my voice finally steady, cutting through the damp night air. It just made it easier for the world to forget he was gone. Jamin reached out, his hand hovering near my face before his fingers grazed my jaw, a touch that was surprisingly gentle for a man of such absolute violence. Then don't be a ghost, Yara. Be a legend. He turned and began to walk toward the mouth of the alley where a black sedan was pulling to a silent stop. He didn't look back to see if I was following. He knew. I took a breath, smoothed the vest that no longer felt like a noose, and stepped out of the shadows and into the winter sky.